So welcome to the webinar, Volunteering, Unpaid Care, Work and Gender in Lower Income Countries, organized jointly by United Nations Volunteers and International Labour Organization. It's my pleasure to be your moderator today for this webinar, and my name is Emilia Asadova. I am a policy specialist and also the lead on research and evidence in United Nations Volunteers, based in headquarters in Bonn. And we are delighted to have you here with us, as this webinar is really to launch our recent study that we did between UNV and ILO, which is on volunteering, unpaid care, work, and gender in lower income countries. And we have a pleasure today to have authors with us who are present in this call, and you will hear from them. This is Anna Barford, Kate Brockie, and Neil Higgins. And they will provide really their insights into intersections of volunteering and unpaid care work, particularly in lower income country, and will also highlight the value that these contributions are making to the societies and the economies. Unpaid care work and volunteering are often undervalued and invisible, but they play a very important role in sustaining economies, but as well as supporting communities and also fostering the very necessary social cohesion. Women in particularly bear the heaviest burden, dedicating significant amounts of time to both unpaid care responsibilities and voluntary work, often with limited recognition or support. So today in the research that you will hear about, it does explore some of the trends, statistical gaps that exist, as well as some of the implications, and a case study from Bangladesh to showcase and so that we better understand this dynamics. Today we have a distinguished panel, which includes experts, researchers, and practitioners who will share their perspectives on the topic and discuss how we can recognize and redistribute the unpaid care work and ensure that volunteerism is both unpaid care work and ensure that volunteerism is an empowering opportunity rather than an additional burden. So today we will be hearing from Noel Druich, the chief of UNV New York office and UN System Affairs, United Nations Volunteers. Then we will have with us Neil Higgins, who is a senior research specialist, along with the two authors, Anna Barford and Kate Brockie of the publication. We also have Valeria Esquivel, who is an employment policies and gender specialist with International Labour Organization. We have also with us Dr. Fahmida Hatoon, who is executive director of the Center for Policy Dialogue in Bangladesh. And we will close with Sarah Elder, who's the head of the Employment Analysis Unit with International Labour Organization. I encourage all participants to actively engage and ask questions and reflect on how, what are some of your insights from this report and how it can inform your interests and your area of work. And I would encourage you to put your questions in the Q&A part of the screen, which is below. And also you could look in the chat. There are some of the instructions that have been posted by our webinar moderator. With no further ado, I want now to pass the floor to my colleague, Noel Druich, who is the chief of our New York office and UN System Affairs. Noel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Emilia. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to this important webinar on volunteering and paid care work and gender in lower income countries. Volunteerism plays a vital role in strengthening communities, fostering solidarity, and supporting development efforts worldwide. Yet, despite its contributions, there remains a significant gap in data and a lack of unified framework to measure volunteer work globally. This is one of the reasons why the United Nations Volunteers is dedicating our upcoming State of the World Volunteerism report to advancing the measurement of volunteerism. Throughout this year, we are working with a range of partners to develop a global volunteer index, a step towards enhancing how we recognize and understand volunteer contribution. Today's event marks a significant step in our ongoing effort to recognize, measure, and elevate the value of volunteerism, particularly in lower income countries, where these contributions are often invisible yet essential. This particular webinar is an important result of our long-standing collaboration between United Nations volunteers and the International Labour Organization, aimed at supporting government in better measuring and acknowledging volunteer work. On behalf of UNV, let me thank our colleagues from ILO who are co-authors of the study you will hear about today. This webinar serves three key purposes. The first is to present the findings from this newly published UNV-ILO study on volunteering and paid care work and gender in lower income countries, shedding light on the relationship between unpaid care work and volunteerism and their impact on societal well-being and economic outcomes. Two is to explore policy solutions that recognize, support, and value unpaid care work and volunteer contribution, particularly for women who bear a disproportionate share of these responsibilities. And finally, to emphasize the urgent need for better data and measurement tools to capture the full scale of unpaid care and volunteerism, especially in lower income countries. Throughout today's discussion, you will hear about the gender nature of unpaid care work and volunteerism and the challenges women and girls face in balancing these responsibilities. You will hear about the economic and social value of these contributions, which too often remain invisible in formal policies. You will hear about the statistical gaps that must be addressed to ensure equity, recognition, and support for those engaged in unpaid care and volunteer work. And you will also hear, as already mentioned by Emilia, a case study from Bangladesh offering an in-depth look of these dynamics in a lower middle income country context. Dear participants, this is not just a presentation. It is a collective effort. We encourage you to engage, ask questions, and share your perspective as we examine the intersections between volunteering and unpaid care work. With that, I look forward to the rich discussions ahead and thank you for your interest and for your participation. Over to you, Emilia.
Thank you so much, Noel. And right now, it's my pleasure to actually go to the main protagonists of this webinar and why this webinar is happening. So it's my pleasure to give the floor to Neil Higgins, as well as Anna and Kate, to present the main findings from the study. Neil, the floor is yours.
Okay. Hello, can you see my screen? Yes.
Yes, we can see.
Okay, yes. So I'm Neil O'Higgins. I work in the ILO, in the Employment Analysis Unit of the ILO, and indeed together with Anna Barford and Kate Brocky from the University of Cambridge, we prepared this paper on volunteering, unpaid care work and gender in lower income countries, in particular focusing on the intersection between volunteering and unpaid care work. I'll do most of the talking now, but I hope that Anna and Kate will have a chance to intervene later on, especially because they know a lot. They did the bulk of the work on this paper. So today I'm going to talk about, first of all, I'll start by talking about what are we talking about, some definitions and why it's important, but we've already heard a little bit about that with some of the introductory stuff. And then I'll talk about some of the broad global trends and characteristics in unpaid care and volunteering, and then I'll take a deeper dive into look at the case study of Bangladesh. And end with a few concluding remarks and suggestions as how to go forward. So, what are we talking about? Well, unpaid care work. First of all, it's worth making the distinction between direct care work and indirect, for clarification. So direct meaning direct services to other individuals, like feeding a baby or nursing a relative, and indirect, so more general services like cooking and cleaning. Also, because not to avoid confusion with when we start talking about volunteering. But for our purposes, the important distinction is to be made is between unpaid care work within the household and unpaid care work outside the household. And generally, statistically, the focus on international statistics is on unpaid care work within the household. We're going to talk more actually today about unpaid care work outside the household and as it intersects with volunteering. So unpaid care work. On the other hand, we have volunteer work, which formally constitutes non-compulsory work performed for others without pay. That is all work done for others, that is, but non-household members. Generally speaking, we can also make a distinction here between more formal organization-based volunteering and the more informal or direct volunteering. And it's actually far more on the direct, informal, and less recognized and less recorded forms of volunteering that we want to concentrate. Of course, both unpaid care work and volunteer work are by their nature unpaid. So for the ILO, they are work, but not employment. And they intersect, this is the point. Unpaid care work provided to non-household members is, by its nature, volunteering. It is non-compulsory work performed for others. Why do we care about it? Well, there are a lot of benefits to individuals, families, communities, and society as a whole that come through both of these phenomena. Also, the individuals undertaking these activities, although that's part of the point is how can we make this more value to them. It's also a very extensive phenomenon. I think we're all aware. The latest estimates suggest that around 50% of the working age population engage in volunteering on a, say, more or less regular basis, whilst unpaid care is enormous in terms of its involvement of people and value. The ILO estimates that indeed, if it were paid, then it would constitute around 9% of global GDP. That's an enormous sum of money. These phenomena are understudied, especially in lower income countries, especially as regards direct, this more informal forms of volunteering, which unpaid care work or volunteer care work constitutes for the most part, and especially when we're talking about the intersection between unpaid care and volunteering. And indeed, that's what I'm going to talk about. There are highly gendered aspects of both forms of work and their intersection, and that's really what I'm going to focus on today. So just to get a little clarity, unpaid work, of course, there is unpaid work which is neither volunteer work nor unpaid care work. That's the green circle on the right, such as a big chunk of this is subsistence agriculture, for example. But when we talk about unpaid care work and volunteer work, well, we have unpaid care work, of course, which is such as cooking, cleaning for the household members, which is not volunteer work. And we have volunteer work, which is not volunteer care work, such as litter picking or running community events. But then we have the intersection. So community health work, nursing, teaching, cooking, cleaning, and childcare undertaken by individuals for people outside their immediate family or household. So that's the basic point. So some trends and characteristics. Both women and men spend a substantial amount of their time in unpaid care work. But of course, the darker blue lines here indicate women's involvement, and the lighter blue are men's involvement. And it's very obvious from here, and here putting if we express the care work in terms of the ratio of the time spent by women compared to men, we can see that everywhere, women spend a lot more time on care work, unpaid care work, than do men. And this is the case everywhere. It's universally true. It's more so in middle-income countries than in either low or high-income countries, but still it's ubiquitous. One thing I would point to in this figure, I don't know how easily you can see, but amongst the lower middle income countries, Bangladesh is indicated there. Bangladesh is one of the country that we do the case study on. In Bangladesh, the ratio of women to men's time in unpaid care work is particularly high. It's more than 8 times. Women spend more than 8 times as much time on unpaid care work than men do. Volunteer work also involves a lot of people. It varies quite a lot from country to country, and there's not this same clear gender distinction in terms of volunteer work as a whole. In some countries more men, some countries more women. On the whole, actually, more men are more likely to be involved in volunteer work than women as a whole. But we'll get into a little more detail with that later. So if we see, there's a varied picture across countries. What I'd also notice here is there's not many countries represented here, and that has to do with the difficulties with actually getting comparative data on a broad range of countries. We're working on that, and the UNV ILO partnership is indeed aimed at promoting the measurement of volunteer work, but there is still much to be done there. So some initial observations. There's a clear gender pattern in unpaid care work. I think we all know this. I would just add that it's most pronounced in middle-income countries. The gender patterns in volunteer work are more nuanced, but as we shall see they are pretty clear when we start looking at different types of unpaid, different types of volunteer work. Unpaid care work statistics tend to refer to unpaid care work within the family, which for us is an issue in and of itself, and we'll come back to that. So let's look at Bangladesh. In order to do the analysis in Bangladesh, we used both National Labour Force survey data, but also National Time Use Survey data. Time Use Survey data is particularly useful in looking at types of work like unpaid care and voluntary work because of their intermittent nature, and it gives allows a much more detailed analysis of types of volunteer and also unpaid care work. I would just add that Bangladesh is characterized, as I already indicated, by a very high female to male gender ratio in unpaid care work. It's also, although we haven't seen that yet, one of the lowest female to male ratios in the prevalence of volunteer work. So in Bangladesh, men are more likely than women to be engaged in volunteer work. And this we can see from this figure. This figure presents the age profile of volunteers in Bangladesh. And we can see on the right we have men and on the left we have women. The men's rectangles are much higher, taller, reflecting the greater engagement of men in volunteer work as a whole. We can also see from the figure that there is an inverted U age profile, so that younger and older people, both men and women, are less likely to be engaged in volunteering. Similarly, if we turn to volunteering by educational attainment, we see that the tendency to volunteer tends to increase with increasing levels of educational attainment. More educated people tend to volunteer a little bit more. It's not very marked, but it is, and it's true for both men and women. Getting more to the, let's say, core of our analysis, we can see that if we look at the type of volunteer work, or the mode of volunteer work, that is organization-based versus informal or direct volunteering, particularly for women, but for both women and men, both women and men are much more likely to be engaged in informal, direct volunteering, that is, without the intervening of a organizational framework between the volunteer and the recipient of the volunteer services. It's particularly the case for women, but it's also true for men too. If we look at the time spent on these different activities, because direct informal volunteering tends to be, on average, tends to take a little less time, we see that the picture is slightly different, but still women spend around 3/4 of their time, their volunteering time, in informal volunteering. For men, it's about 45% of the time, but still a substantial chunk of time also for men. But women in particular are engaged in these informal forms, less recognized, less visible forms of volunteering, and that's really the point. If we turn now to care and volunteering, and we look at the distribution of time spent on different activities by women and men amongst volunteers. This is all based on people who do at least some volunteering on a daily basis. We see that, of course, looking at the first block at the bottom of this figure, women do much more household care work than do men, about more than 6 times as much in terms of time amongst volunteers. But we can also see that when we start looking at volunteer work, the 2 blocks above, we can see that women do much more, the volunteering work that they do is much more likely to involve care services. So about 80% of women volunteers' time spent volunteering is in volunteer care work. Whereas for men, there is a significant amount of time spent in volunteer care work, but it is much less than half of the time, and it's, of course, much less significant than for women. So both household care services and unpaid voluntary care work is predominantly female phenomena. So there are clear gender patterns in unpaid care work and in the specific types of volunteer work. As we know and was emphasized at the beginning, unpaid household care work is primarily done by women, but also volunteer care work. Women spend, as I said, around 8% of volunteering time on volunteer care work, and for men, that's around 40% of their time spent volunteering. Volunteer work in Bangladesh, as indeed elsewhere, is primarily direct or informal, not organizational based, and this is especially true amongst women. Informal volunteering is less recognized. It tends not to be picked up by research and statistics, and it's in general, the analysis of this forms of work is much less. It also tends to be less recognized more generally by society, and it's less instrumental to careers. It's more about reciprocal support. We talk in the paper about being about getting by more than getting on. So it's not so much about individuals gaining something from their volunteering, but rather helping communities to get by. The gender characteristics of volunteering in Bangladesh, as elsewhere, of course, reflect the division of labour between the productive and reproductive spheres. And I'm sure my colleague Valeria will say a little bit more about this in her intervention. And this has implications for the recognition of and the value attributed to the different types of volunteer work. Again, I would bring the issue of statistics up again. The international statistics on unpaid care and domestic work tend to refer to household-based services. So the similar care services for those outside the family or household, that is, volunteer care work, are not included in the current international statistics on care work. Although technically this will be possible using the existing time use survey classifications, and we would encourage that to come about. So just some concluding remarks and suggestions arising from the paper. I would say that the paper is quite a involved and developed paper, and I would encourage you to go. There is really quite a lot in there about analysing these issues in some detail. In any case, to summarise, volunteering and unpaid care work have highly gendered patterns, as I think I've illustrated. Unpaid care work, whether it is undertaken in the household or whether it's a form of volunteer care work, is clearly female dominated, whereas other forms of volunteer work tends to be more mixed. Indeed, it tends to be a little bit more dominated by men. So the volunteer care work is very clearly a gender-dominated activity. The evidence and analysis has improved a lot, and indeed the ILO and UNV are actively engaged in promoting the measurement and improvement of measurement of volunteer work in general and volunteer co-work specifically. But there's still more can be done, and more than that, and perhaps the purpose of underlying purpose of the analysis is I think there's much more can be done to enhance the benefits of volunteering, particularly these female-dominated and informal forms of volunteering and unpaid care work. For example, as regards knowledge building, well, the ongoing efforts through the UNV ILO partnership, for example, and more generally, there's a need to increase the collection of data on an analysis of volunteer work through the introduction of modules into the labour force survey, but it's also important here to identify the various forms. I think one of the points of this paper and the presentation is to make clear that there are different types of volunteer work, and they're not all equal in many respects. And it's important to identify also the various forms of unpaid care and volunteer work. Again, I would repeat that it would be good if paid care work outside of the family was included in the statistical definition and measurement of unpaid care work in international statistics. And more generally, there's a need to develop and build on the existing knowledge base particularly on the gendered patterns of voluntary work and the different types of voluntary work, especially in lower income countries. Turning to more generally to action that can be taken, well, I think we talk a little bit in the paper about the policies that can be implemented both at national, regional, and local level, and also both by governmental and non-governmental actors, volunteer organisations, for example, to promote the recognition and support of volunteers, especially informal volunteers and caregivers, and facilitate the equitable access to volunteer opportunities. One of the things that we observe and we report in the paper is unequal access to specific volunteer opportunities, particularly organisation-based volunteer opportunities. We think that there's certainly a role to be played by skills recognition and certification volunteers. This would certainly help volunteers and unpaid care workers to be able to take advantage of the competencies acquired or more easily gain from the competencies acquired through doing this work, and therefore enhance the benefits to be had from these forms of work. And at the international level, there's certainly room to promote further the 5R framework for decent care work. I mean, as regards the subject of our paper, this is mainly the first three of these R's: the recognition, reduction, and redistribution of unpaid care work. But also, it's worth remembering that also paid care work is in need of better reward and representation. And I think with that, I'll pass the floor back.
Yes, thank you very much, Neil. I would like to ask whether Kate and Anna have anything that they would like to add as the authors and researchers on this important topic.
Thank you, Neil, for the great presentation. I think I just wanted to add to the brilliant presentation that Neil's given us, just to say that I think the time use approach that we used for this was really important, because obviously if you're spending time doing one thing like unpaid care work, then it blocks time from doing something else like paid work or volunteer work, which might be organised and lead to opportunities. So I think it's really important to have that lens to think about what people are spending their time doing, and how, of course, we've only got the set number of hours in the day, and so how one activity blocks another or can enable another. And I think in terms of the policy responses, I'd be particularly interested to see how can we stop people getting trapped in one particular mode, and how can we make it so that when someone's finished doing one particular type of work for whatever motivation or need that they have to do that, that there's a fluidity and a flexibility that they can then move out or beyond that, and they don't get trapped in one particular type of activity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. Kate?
Yeah, just to echo what Anna said about the time use survey, this was the first national time use survey that Bangladesh has done, and we were able to do this analysis because of having that recent time use survey and the module in the labour force survey as well. And having those statistics means that we're really able to dig in to these gender dynamics and the different types of unpaid care work and volunteer work are happening. So yeah, I think it really affirms the value of this partnership between UN Volunteers and the ILO, and continuing to build these base of statistics so we can start to understand this in the context of other low-income countries as well.
Thank you, colleagues, and this is indeed a fascinating and new kind of dimension where we are looking, at least also from the UN Volunteers side. I would like now to go to the our panel discussion, where we will have two of the experts to kind of comment and reflect about the findings that were presented by the authors. And also I can see that there are some questions that are coming in which are relevant to what was presented, and we have a Q&A session, so I would revise this and review them in case we will not hear the answers during our panel discussion and reflections during the Q&A session. But for the panel, we have two experts. We have Valeria Esquivel, who is an employment policies and gender specialist from the International Labour Organization. She is the expert, especially on the gender dimension, so we are keen to hear from Valeria. As well, we have Dr. Fahmida Hatoun, who is an executive director of the Center for Policy Dialogue in Bangladesh, which is very relevant to our case study as well. So my first question would be to Valeria to open this discussion is, we have heard that the report highlighted the gender dimensions, and Neil talked about it, of unpaid care work and volunteerism. From your expertise and experience, how does this imbalance affect women's participation in informal employment and other economic opportunities? And what are some of your reflections or some of the examples that you could tell us?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. I have to say that I also wear an invisible hat as a time use expert. So, and I will tell you an anecdote with UNV later on, but I'm certainly thrilled to be here and also to see the publication of this report. I remember when Kate and Anna started, and Neil also contacted me. So congratulations on a great work. Time use surveys have allowed us to complement labor force surveys, and when we put them together or when we analyze them in tandem, we have confirmed everywhere in the world that the main reason for women not to be in the labor force is the unpaid care work. So the fact that some women are able to get services that replace their unpaid labor in some portion, not all, has allowed them to get into the labor market. And I have to say that that seems to be a reallocation or a redistribution that seems to be far easier than reallocating within households between women and men. And that is what Neil has shown us, that except for those countries in the Scandinavian countries that are close to one, that has proved very, very hard to change. So the sheer volume of unpaid care work that was also very much in the news and visible during COVID is the main limitation for women not to be in the labor force. It restrains or constrains some men, but not comparatively. So when we think about that 5R framework that Neil kind of put forward, the fact that the unpaid care work in general, not only volunteer care work, needs to be redistributed, has to do with women being able to take the opportunities in the labor market. And also we know for a fact that when there are investments in care services, these services generate decent employment opportunities, particularly for women. I wanted to bring one issue that I think that brings as not I would say perhaps it brings the 5R together, and is when the unpaid volunteer care work, which is at the intersection of unpaid care work and volunteering, is done in conditions that are closer to employment relationship than to true, I would say, volunteering. And that is when it is persistent, when it takes the most or the majority of the hours of those who are volunteering, when there is no, that is getting by, and that doesn't have the rights at work and rights to work that we hope that these positions should have. I'm talking about community health workers working on HIV/AIDS in sub-Saharan countries, talking about community childcare workers in Latin America, Aganwadi workers in India. So these situations in which there is a missing link to the labor rights as workers, and I think this is not the focus of this report, but I think that is something we have to bear in mind in thinking about the overlap between care work and volunteering. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Valeria, for your insights. We have actually a lot of questions coming in, as I see, which are about the 5R framework, and some of our listeners are interested in their country context, etc. I'm very happy that there are questions like this. So I would now, for now, I would not take them, but we will try to address them as we discuss. I think I want to now go to Dr. Famida Hatoun, because there are some questions that are related to Bangladesh, and some of our listeners are wondering whether there are cultural aspects to, you know, what we have seen in the case study as well. But I really want to ask you, Dr. Famida, what are some takeaways that are there for you from the findings? Is there something that is new, that is surprising for you, and particularly regarding this gender aspect and the economic participation?
Thank you very much, Emilia. I would like to also thank the organizers for inviting me to speak at this very interesting session. And this is also very topical and important in the context of Bangladesh. And indeed, I have special interest in this topic, in the subject, because a couple of years back, we also conducted a similar study, which is on the estimating women's contribution to the economy. Basically, we had a survey-based study which looked into the activities which are not accounted for in the national account system. So, you know, we traditionally, the traditional economic estimation of the gross domestic product does not take into consideration of the activities which are not marketed, which are not valued in terms of markets, market values, which are not transacted in the market and valued in monetary terms. So that's why a lot of women's work remain outside the domain of national accounts. And unpaid care work, voluntary work are such work which also remain outside, estimation of the national accounts. But that's very important. And you asked me about the specific reasons or cultural or social norms which can really play an important role or not. Indeed, it does, but there are also, I would start from the economic reasons, because the labor market is such that a lot of employment is in the informal sector. If you look at the labor force participation of women, it's about 37%, but within that 37%, almost 90% work is done informally. Women workers are engaged in the informal sector. So what happens that at times the salaries are so low, and the working conditions are very poor, and also the guarantee for job security is so low. So many women, particularly during our survey, we have also asked many women that, given the opportunity, would you be working outside? Then many women actually denied. They did not want to work outside. They felt that it is better. Firstly, social norms, that they feel that their main responsibility is within their domain of the household. And secondly, they would also consider that how much they would earn by being engaged outside with their skills and education. So that is a very economic aspect of that. So that brings us to the issue of skills development, giving better higher education so that they can get employment in such areas where they can get higher salaries and they have job guarantee. So that's the thing. And also this is also relevant to the fact that there is huge wage discrimination between men and women. So I think these findings have important policy recommendations which have been presented in the paper, and we have also mentioned in various papers, various discussions as well, that firstly that the policy reforms have to be done in order to take into account these activities. Of course, the system of national accounts of the United Nations that does not have the opportunity to include these, but there is something called satellite account, that was, so many of these words can be brought within that, which can be shown separately, not within the framework of GDP estimation, but you can show as a as a satellite, as part of the satellite account. And this is important just to show that how much work is done and how much value it can create. And it can create not only for themselves, but also for the households, for the others, for the other members of the household. So that's very important. The other policy recommendations would be is that many women also do not have the opportunity in the context of Bangladesh particularly, or similar countries where infrastructure facilities and government facilities are very limited. So they do not have good childcare facilities, or women who are coming from remote areas, coming to the larger cities, they do not have a place to stay. So hostels for women are also important, and these services have to be mainly provided by the government. But the private sector also has a role that, those women which are working, for them creating an environment that they can, keep their children in the daycare center, those facilities are very important. So I think, in general, there is a role for the government, the private sector, but non-government organizations, civil society organizations, the media, they also have a role to create awareness on the fact that the value created by women's unpaid care work or volunteer work has very important significance in the lives of women and the household, and also for the society as a whole. I think I would stop here. Maybe I can take questions later on.
Thank you, Dr. Fahmida. This is very insightful. I can see there are lots of questions, and I think maybe, Valeria, I go back to you, because there are some of the questions that are relevant. For example, there's a question about what is the other type of measurement of the care workload, and there's also has been an interesting question about how can we ensure more women receive financial recognition? What policies and actions could be taken? And also, there's one particular question about the policies and programs that can promote, volunteering and unpaid care work, or what is needed rather to address this gender inequalities, rather than reinforcing the traditional gender roles. So maybe, Valeria, you could touch upon a few of these aspects.
Through all the questions together. Okay, so let me separate the issue of measurement from the issue of policies, and also let me tell participants that I've answered with links to the 5R framework and the work of the ILO on that. And that is where my anecdote on UNV with UNV comes. It was just to create some curiosity from you, but I collected the Buenos Aires time use survey in 2005. And then United Nations volunteers came to us to support the time use survey in the city of Rosario, also in Argentina. So that was a time use survey at the city level that was supported by you, and where we work on the way of differentiating more the type of volunteer work that could be that took place, the very same way here Neil has shown. So so part of bringing this work back to invisibility, and also part of understanding its dynamic, if it is direct, the way Neil mentioned, or through organizations, is really about having good classificators in time use surveys, which of course means that we need to have time use surveys in the first place. And an important point is that these time use surveys need to have information about the household, information about the care policies that these households kind of have access to, and information about the labor position, the labor market position. Because if not, we cannot understand the time spent in the vacuum. It is time spent or decisions about allocating time that take place within a context. And certainly, if that's true for each of us, it's true for the people we work with or we collect data about. So certainly an emphasis on good time use surveys, in particular in developing or low income countries, that can be matched with labor force surveys is super important. And with regards to policies, I think one important dimension would be if, I mean, and I'm following on what Neil said and what is in the report, it has to be to get on, not only to get by. Because if not, again, it's on the shoulders of women, and particularly young women, that the organization of care rests. And it shouldn't be like that. So, for example, good initiatives that I have thought beforehand have to do with certifications in these community care workers, because they have the knowledge. And then, I mean, our colleagues in Uruguay, Sinter4, have been working on this. So that knowledge is shared, is organized, is brought from these volunteers. And then there is a qualification that tells the world that that is what they know how to do, and that with good systems in place allows them to transit from this volunteer work to decent employment, for example. So that is key. And also some of the redistribution of this work. The very same things we say about unpaid care work apply to unpaid volunteer work, in the sense that why is it that it's done mostly by women, and why is it that these women don't get to those volunteering opportunities that would take them somewhere else? There are good policies on skill certification that we have had experience. I insist that it's important to separate the true volunteer work from forms that undercover a relationship and that deprive the workers of their labor rights and social protection rights. And that is also, that has been very loud and clear amongst community childcare workers in Latin America in very many contexts. So I think that those policies that address, well, what I'm saying is not so different from what Neil has said, and also it's the thing we think about when we want to address gender inequalities. We want to rebalance what is happening, and we want to rebalance the benefits of what we see in the reality. So I would answer your many, many questions in this way. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Valeria. Is there anything, Neil, you would like to add?
Not really. I think this recognition of competencies is a very important element here. And I think Valeria basically covered it. I mean, also the 5R recognition, redistribution, how to make the effort, not to reinforce gender inequalities, but to redress them, and also access to some forms of volunteering opportunities can be an issue. I think worthy of mention. We discuss a bit in the paper itself.
Yes, I think from the volunteering side, I would speak because we know that globally 70% of volunteering is informal volunteering, and you have already mentioned in your presentation and in the paper that women are involved mostly in informal volunteering, which already strikes quite a stark image as well. Now I would like to go back to Dr. Famida just to sort of ask you and your your advice or your views on how do you see what could the government interventions or civil society, community organizations, volunteer organizations, businesses do in really helping to redistribute the care responsibilities, but also support volunteerism in the context of Bangladesh. And you have mentioned some of this and also an interesting study that you did. So perhaps just continue.
Okay, yes, thank you. And I also see a similar question in the Q&A box regarding the policies and institutional framework, how this can be changed to reduce or restructure this. I think I have partly dealt with this in my previous deliberation, but also a bit more. You see, the issue is here that the labor market is still differentiated between men and women still. So, and whatever number of women are in the labor market, they are not very highly paid because the fact is that they are less educated and less skilled. So this is the first point to be considered. And then the issue of the opportunity for volunteering comes. But then the issue for policies and institutional structure is that many women who are who enter the white collar jobs, for example, particularly at the universities, the students, the top 10 students would be always female students, and they enter the labor market. And when they are about to get promoted and go towards mid-level of their career, they have to return to home because of responsibilities. Their families expand and then other responsibilities. So the career clock is totally mismatched with the biological clock and also the family responsibility. So then after a while, when they want to really come back to the labor market, they do not get the opportunity. So then these women who once were in the labor market and used to have the skills, they become unemployed. And then if they want to be engaged in something, they really don't get readily something. So they get engaged in volunteer works. Many of them get engaged in volunteering to spend their time or to have their own world to that extent. So there should be schemes for these women who want to come back to the labor market through skills development and for the mid-career like that. The other is that the high skills, those who are working, for example, one of the most important sectors for women to work in Bangladesh is the ready-made garment sectors. There are a large number of women work, but there also what happens that after a certain level they do not get promoted, or low-level jobs, low-paid jobs are there, because the skilled work or those work which need technologically advanced skills, they lag behind. Many of them also do not want to get the skills and become a manager or a supervisor, because they feel that they will have more responsibility, and they will have, they will be depriving their families because they have their another responsibility once they go back. So I think, for women, those who are in the labor market, they also have to work within the households as unpaid care worker. So they have the double burden. And those who are better off financially, they want to be engaged in the volunteering to have their time, to make themselves in some way meaningful or that. So I think first thing is that this has some cultural implications, in the sense that the connotation, the the implications that women do not work, that concept itself leads to various discrimination, and this sort of discrimination sometimes lead to violence within the household, because you are not worthy of, because you do not earn any money. So the financial importance is lacking in case of a female member within the family. So there are many other causes of violences, but this is one of the reasons for violences. So it is very important for a country like Bangladesh to bring women to the labor force more and more. And I have mentioned about some of the recommendations that how to improve their participation. Those are very much needed. And then the second step would be, to engage in volunteer work or not. So, of course, once, if it is a developed society, then it is a matter of choice. It's personal choice whether I work or not. I mean, work meaning that work with a salary or not, that's a personal choice. But when we think about a society like ours, it is very important for women to be engaged in productive work with financial remuneration.
Thank you, Dr. Famida. This is right to the point, and I just want to add that on the topic of volunteering, and there was a question in terms of the policy frameworks that have to do with volunteering. In 2024, the government of Bangladesh has adopted a new policy on volunteering with exactly a very important points of recognition of volunteers in what they do. So there are some progress and aspects in that work as well. Now I would like to, I'm very happy because we have managed to answer, I think, through our panel discussion and touch upon many questions that were asked. But there's one question that I would like to take from the Q&A. Does UNV-ILO study on unpaid care work in Bangladesh address the role of community imagery, which means probably it's the image in the community in terms of shaping perceptions of volunteer contributions? So perhaps Anna or Kate could come in on this.
Maybe I can start, and then Kate, if you want to add later, that would be great, because Kate's actually doing a PhD about Bangladesh at the moment, so she's got a lot of detailed insights about the country context that I don't have. But maybe I can just zoom out a little bit for a moment, because the report's got two kind of big substantive parts, and one part is this really detailed study of Bangladesh, and the other part is a broader literature review, which looks at how volunteering and unpaid care work have been kind of shaped, what the motivations behind it are, and then quite a lot of different examples from many different countries and different regions, but focusing on developing countries. So it kind of gives a broader view, maybe. And the Bangladesh section is really primarily numerical. So in terms of community imagery, it's harder to get at that kind of qualitative meaning that you might be kind of referring to, I guess, in that interesting question. But maybe if we kind of look at volunteering and unpaid work more generally in developing countries, I think depending on what type of volunteering it is and how it's organized and what it's being done, I think the aspiration to do that work varies. So it's, to use Neil's language, it's quite a nuanced picture in that sense. And you'll see that some types of volunteering, typically the ones that might be associated with accessing a pathway to work, or creating the kind of getting the work experience that you might want to, that might impress people, working with a big organization, getting good references, and very often actually getting a stipend, which kind of throws into question a little bit these ideas about volunteering work being unpaid. It's paid at sometimes people do receive some remuneration for their work, but it's just at a much lower level than paid work might be. But in some contexts, and a lot of the work that I've done with Neil before has been on youth unemployment and underemployment, in contexts where work is very hard to come by, volunteering and the small stipend that comes with that actually become a very appealing offer, and something that people might want to do and get into and then continue to do for an extended period, just like the type of volunteering that Valeria was questioning in terms of, what are the labour rights associated with that type of work. So in response to the question, I think there's quite a varied picture in terms of what the community image of it is and how kind of aspirational it is. And sometimes that's to do with the economic value it brings. If you want more, please do read the report.
Thank you, Anna. Kate, would you like to add anything?
No, thank you, Anna. That was a brilliant summary. And yeah, we didn't look explicitly at community imagery of volunteering in the report, but I think there are a lot of themes that emerge here surrounding the way that different forms of volunteering are imagined, and care work, which is so often associated with qualities that we see as being kind of naturally feminine and maternal. That kind of community perception often negates the huge amount of skill that is associated with caring, and also the amount of value both in personal and reciprocal ways, as well as very tangible ways that informal care work kind of brings to communities and societies. And so, yeah, having ways of recognizing those skills and ways of quantifying that value is a really important step forward in kind of changing that perception and that imagery.
Thank you very much, Kate. I would like to thank all our panelists, and I know we have really sort of talked more about what is in the paper, because for those of us who have worked and read the paper, there are lots and lots of examples and a lot of answers to the questions that you've asked. And I know Anna also mentioned there are examples from other countries, and perhaps your country is also mentioned, although as Neil has touched in his presentation, there is a lack of data and statistical data, but there are some emerging case studies on the topic. So I would like to now thank our panelists, our authors, and thank all our participants, and I would like to invite our colleague Sarah Elder from International Labour Organization, the head of Employment Analysis Unit, to do the closing remarks for our today's webinar.
Okay, thank you so much, Emilia. You've made this quite easy for me. Yeah, I have the easiest job of all that have been engaged with us so far, which is to wrap up the conversation and close, and to show our great appreciation for all of the participants that have joined. I've been really impressed by the activity that's happened in the chat that shows people are very genuinely interested. Let me thank so much Neil, Anna, and Kate for putting their brains together again and delving into this really important topic, and yeah, pulling out all of the nuances of the available data sets to showcase what can be done. on this topic. And thank you also to our experts, Valeria and Famida, for helping us to think more about the wider applications and the bigger picture questions of why we feel it's so important to understand all elements of work, including unpaid care work, which we know tends to fall very heavily on the shoulders of women in particular, and especially making sure that all work is recognized and properly valued in the name of social justice. That's what the purpose of these studies and the purpose of this partnership that we do with UNV. Volunteer work is extremely important. It's something that contributes to society, and it contributes to the well-being of the volunteers who engage in such work. So we need to make sure that such work is measured and valued. And I appreciate very much this study and the opportunity to partner with UNV on making such work more tangible, so that we can speak more coherently about this value and the recognition. I appreciate all of the action points that were put forth. I hope that such work can be made more visible, recognized, formalized, etc. Although, of course, we know that there are many reasons why such work continues to remain off of the radar. So thanks again to all involved. Amelia, you were a brilliant moderator, but thanks also to Vera and Derek, who are behind the scenes on the UNV side. So I think with that, it is my great pleasure to close the webinar, and we will continue the conversation.
Yes. Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you to all the authors and UNV team behind and involved in the research. Just for those of you who are still with us, I will say that our next joint research between ILO and UNV is on volunteering among elderly people. So we will have another webinar coming soon. So stay tuned, and thank you very much for being with us this morning, afternoon, or evening, and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye.